What would you do if the man meant to protect you called you nothing and didn't even realize you were listening? That single moment shatters everything for a Luna trapped in a political bond, because by the time the sun rises, she's already gone, leaving behind the title The Pack and the alpha who never chose her, while carrying the one thing they can't afford to lose. But what they don't know is that her departure isn't an escape. It's the beginning of something powerful enough to rewrite every rule they've ever believed in. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Now let's begin the story. Moonlight turned the black stone hall of Nightfall into a cold cathedral. It poured through the high arched dome and spilled across the floor in pale ribbons catching on carved runes and the silver in ceremonial banners. The air itself felt thick, heavy with alpha pheromones and the rigid order of the pack. Betas stood in a wide ring around the central circle, their shoulders squared, their eyes lowered, just enough to show submission without appearing weak. The council watched from the raised dais like judges who had already written the verdict. At the center of the hall stood Alara Vane. She wore the Luna's ritual gown, soft silver that should have looked like moonlight woven into fabric. Her spine was straight, her chin lifted a fraction, her hands relaxed at her sides. She held herself with quiet dignity, the kind that didn't ask permission to exist. But the eyes on her were not the eyes a Luna deserved. They were cool, measuring, guarded, as if she were a blade they weren't sure was sharp enough to fear, or a gift they didn't intend to cherish. Behind the outer ring, a beta whispered just loud enough for the words to carry, "Is that the new Luna?" The wolf beside him answered quickly, voice lowered as though speaking to the stone itself. "No, just an agreement." Alara didn't turn. She didn't flinch. She had learned early that reacting was a kind of surrender in a room built to test who would break first. A half step to her right stood Darien Thorne. He was tall and still so controlled he seemed carved from shadow and muscle. His presence alone tightened the room. The alpha aura rolled off him in slow waves that made lesser wolves swallow and look away. No one stared too long. No one challenged the shape of his authority. And yet he did not touch her. Not a hand on her back. Not even a fingertip brushing the sleeve of her gown. The space between them was less than a breath, but it might as well have been miles. Alara could feel the bond anyway. Not fully formed, no claim had sealed it. No ritual had anchored it, but something existed humming under her skin like a second pulse. It stirred whenever he moved, whenever his scent shifted in the air. It reached for him the way a tide reached for the moon, and it stopped, as if it met an invisible wall. The ceremony continued. Words were spoken in the old language that had shaped Nightfall long before war, long before treaties, long before Alara's name ever crossed their lips. A ceremonial blade caught moonlight. A bowl of water reflected the dome like a dark eye. Then Elder Magnus Crow rose from the dais. His voice was deep and measured, a voice made for proclamations. From this night forward, he announced, Alara Vane is Luna of the Nightfall Pack. The hall waited. There should have been a sound, an answering growl, a chorus of acknowledgement, the pack's instinctive acceptance. Even reluctant wolves usually offered something if only to obey tradition. But there was no confirming roar, no true submission, only silence. It was the kind of silence that said, "We heard, we will comply, but we do not bow." Alara held her posture anyway. She didn't allow herself to look down. She refused to shrink even as she felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken judgments settle on her shoulders like chains. When the last ceremonial words faded, the room loosened slightly. Wolves shifted. A few betas exhaled. The tension changed shape, but it didn't vanish. Magnus stepped down from the dais, robes brushing the stone steps. He stopped just close enough to Alara to make the insult personal. The war ended, he said, voice low and satisfied at the necessary cost. Ilara didn't answer. Her breath stayed even. Her eyes remained calm. Magnus tilted his head, studying her like a problem he had solved. Your family kept their lives, he added. That is something you should remember. Alara met his gaze without trembling. I have never forgotten. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They landed like a stone dropped into still water, small on the surface, heavy underneath. Darien stood beside her, unmoving. He did not intervene. Another council member, an elder with a narrow face and impatient eyes, leaned forward as though he couldn't help himself. Peace requires a binding, he said, a chain strong enough to hold old hatred in place. His eyes slid over Alara like she was the chain he meant. The council looked at her, the way wolves looked at territory, not as a person, but as something to be held. Darien finally spoke. His voice was even without heat. The right is complete, he said. There is no need to repeat what is already obvious. It wasn't a defense, it wasn't protection, it was a clean end to the conversation, nothing more. Magnus's mouth twitched, satisfied. The council withdrew, leaving Alara in the center of a hall that suddenly felt even colder than before. Agreement. Cost, binding, price. That was what she was to them. And as the pack began to disperse, Alara understood something with a clarity that stung. The ceremony had named her Luna, but no one had chosen her. Not truly. Days turned into weeks with a quiet cruelty that never needed to raise its voice. In the great hall at dinner, Alara sat at the long table beneath the banners of Nightfall's past alphas. The seat beside her Darien seat was almost always empty. When he did appear, he sat with the composed distance of a ruler attending his own court present, impassive, impossible to reach. Servants set plates in front of Alara and bowed, but their eyes slid away before meeting hers. There was respect in their posture, yes, but not warmth, not belonging. At night, she returned to her chambers alone. The room was spacious, appointed with fine things that felt selected for a role rather than a person. A bed large enough for two, curtains heavy as winter, a fireplace that crackled without comfort. No one ever crossed her threshold. She would lie on her back and stare at the ceiling until the darkness blurred into something like sleep. Some nights she whispered to the empty room, not because she expected an answer, but because silence could become a kind of madness if she didn't put words somewhere. Existing, she murmured once, is enough. She didn't believe it, but she repeated it like a vow. In the mornings, she learned the pack's routines. She walked the corridors and memorized the shape of Nightfall Keep like a prisoner, mapping an escape. She learned who bowed and who only nodded, who looked away and who watched too closely. Council meetings happened behind closed doors. Alara wasn't summoned. The first time she approached the council chamber anyway, because she had been Luna long enough to know that the pack's decisions affected her as much as anyone. She reached for the iron handle and found a beta blocking her path. He looked uncomfortable, as though he hated his own words. Luna, the meeting is for the Alpha and Council only. Alara kept her expression smooth. I understand. She turned away without argument. Only when she was out of view did her hand curl into a fist so tight her nails pressed crescents into her palm. Once in a rare, quiet moment, Darien and Alara walked the same corridor at the same time. The air between them felt heavy. His scent, cold pine smoke. Something darker beneath tugged at her instincts like a hook. Her wolf shifted under her skin, restless, hungry for recognition it would not receive. Alara broke the silence first. You don't need to avoid me, she said. Darien kept his gaze forward. I'm not avoiding you. Alara's mouth curved into a humorless smile. Then I'm imagining it. He stopped. It was a small thing one step halted, but it shook her more than she expected. Darien turned his head enough to look at her. His eyes were the color of a storm cloud cut with gold. Distance is necessary, he said. For who? Alara asked softly. He was silent for a heartbeat. Two, then for everyone. He turned away and continued walking, leaving Alara in the corridor with the words echoing like a door closing. Distance for everyone, not just for him, not just to protect himself from feeling, to protect the pack from her, to protect his authority from the complication of wanting her. Alara swallowed the bitterness until it became something she could carry without showing. But her body did not obey her carefully built walls. Whenever she stood too close to Darien, her pulse accelerated. Heat rose under her skin, not from attraction alone, but from something deeper wolf instinct responding to wolf instinct. Her senses sharpened, her breath changed. One evening she passed his study and brushed her fingers against the edge of a table in the corridor, an absent, careless motion. She felt it, a trace of him, like static in her blood. Alara jerked her hand back as though she'd touched fire. Her heart thudded hard. No, she told herself, don't. Later, alone in her chamber, she stared at her wrist. Under the moonlight, a faint silver shimmer emerged beneath the skin. Not a bruise, not a scar, a pattern almost subtle, like the memory of a symbol. It wasn't there in daylight. It only appeared when moonlight kissed her. She traced it with her thumb and whispered, "Mother, what is this?" No answer came. Only the crackle of fire and the distant sound of guards changing shifts. The world kept turning indifferent. Then the border horn sounded one night low and urgent. News raced through the keep the eastern boundary had been breached. A rival pack testing Nightfall's strength. A provocation meant to reopen old wounds. Darien left immediately. Alara watched from an upper landing as he crossed the courtyard cloak, snapping behind him like a shadow with purpose. Wolves moved around him like orbiting moons beat as enforcers the pack's muscle. He didn't look up. He didn't glance toward the window where she stood. The wind rose, the sky darkened, the storm arrived in violent, sudden sheets. Rain struck stone so hard it sounded like fists. Alara stood in her chamber by the window watching lightning fork behind the trees. Something in her chest felt restless. Not fear, not grief, something sharper. The door opened without warning. Alara spun, breath catching. Darien stood in the doorway. His hair was wet rainwater streaming down his temples. His shirt clung to his shoulders. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were not the controlled alpha eyes she'd known. They were sharp and raw the way wolves looked when instinct had clawed past reason. Alara's voice came out small. "Alpha." His gaze snapped to her. "Don't call me that," he said low and hoarse. Alara froze. Darien crossed the room in 2 strides and stopped just inches away. He inhaled one deep breath as if pulling in her scent to steady himself. And it worked. She saw the shift. His shoulders eased the slightest fraction. His rage didn't disappear, but it redirected away from the world toward something inside him, toward her. Alara's wolf stirred alert and wary. Her heart hammered so hard she could hear it. Darien lifted a hand and touched her face. The warmth of his palm spread across her cheek like a shock. Alara trembled. She couldn't stop it. His voice dropped even lower. "Stay." It wasn't a request. It was the kind of command an alpha gave when he expected obedience. But there was something else beneath it. Something human. Something almost desperate, like a plea he would never admit to making. Alara stared at him, throat tight. "I've been here the whole time." For a moment, his expression cracked. Something like pain flashed across his features. Then he pulled her close. The distance of months, 3 long months of silence and cold dinners and empty nights shattered. His mouth found hers with the kind of urgency that felt like surrender. Alara's hands rose to his shoulders, fingers gripping fabric that was still damp from storm rain. Her instincts surged meeting his, the world narrowed to heat and breath and the pounding rhythm beneath her skin. Outside, thunder cracked. Inside, Alara forgot the council, forgot the hall, forgot the word agreement. Darien's hands trembled slightly as he held her as if he had been fighting himself for a long time and was losing now willingly. When they finally broke apart, they stood close forehead to forehead, breathing hard. Darien's eyes searched her face like he was trying to memorize it. "I tried not to let this happen," he whispered. Alara swallowed. "Why?" Darien's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. The silence that followed was different from the silence in the Great Hall. It wasn't dismissal, it was conflict. And for one storm-soaked night, Alara let herself believe that conflict meant she mattered. The next morning, the bed was cold. Alara opened her eyes to pale light and emptiness. Darien was gone. There was no imprint beside her, no lingering warmth, no note, no sign that the night had happened beyond the faint ache in her chest and the memory of his hands. She dressed slowly, as if moving through water, and went to the great hall. Darien stood at the head of the room, speaking with a beta as though nothing had changed. "Continue patrol on the eastern side," he said calmly. Alara stopped a few steps away, waiting for him to glance at her, to acknowledge her presence, to show the smallest sign that the storm night had been real. He didn't. His eyes passed over the room like a ruler scanning territory. They did not stop on her. Elder Magnus appeared with 2 other council members. "The Alpha must keep his clarity," Magnus said, voice flat. "Instinct makes mistakes." Darien nodded once. "I understand." Just like that. The storm night was erased. Alara felt something inside her go very still. That night she couldn't sleep. Restlessness pulled her from bed and into the corridors, bare feet silent against stone. She found herself outside Darien's private study without fully remembering how she got there. Light spilled through the crack beneath the heavy wooden door. Voices drifted out. A woman's voice, smooth, controlled, sharp as a blade wrapped in velvet. "Your Luna looks at you as if you're everything Selena Virex said." Alara went rigid. Then Darien's voice answered, cold enough to turn blood to ice. "She never was." Alara's breath caught. Celine's laughter was soft. "Then why keep a thing with no value?" A pause, long enough for Alara to stop breathing. Darien spoke again slowly, as if choosing each word for maximum distance. "She's a treaty. Nothing more. No protest. No correction. No hesitation." Silence. His silence sealed it. Alara pressed a hand to the wall to steady herself. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. She stood there for a few seconds longer, letting the words finish cutting through what remained of her hope. Then she turned away and walked back to her chamber like a ghost. Inside her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands. Slowly, without thinking, her palm drifted to her lower abdomen. A strange sensation flickered, subtle but unmistakable. Not pain, not sickness, change. Alara's throat tightened. "No," she whispered, but her body did not lie. Outside, the wind moved through the stone corridors like something searching. Alara closed her eyes. The words echoed again, treaty nothing more, and the emptiness inside her made room for a terrifying possibility. She wasn't just being dismissed, she was carrying something that could rewrite everything. The next morning, Alara didn't go to the hall. She went to the healer. Lysera Moonfall's chamber smelled of herbs and clean smoke. The light inside was softer than the rest of the keep, as if the stones here had learned mercy. Shelves lined the walls, bundles of dried plants, bottles folded cloth. It was a room built for quiet truths. Lysera looked up when Alara entered. She watched her for a long moment, eyes sharp and knowing. Luna Lysera said gently, "You didn't come here for something small." Alara's fingers curled around the edge of her cloak. Her voice was low. "I need to know what my body is doing." Lysera nodded without asking questions. She closed the door and approached hands careful and practiced. Her touch was professional, but when her fingers brushed Alara's wrist, she paused. Her breath hitched. The faint silver beneath Alara's skin reacted to Lysera's touch, shimmering brighter for a heartbeat. Lysera whispered almost to herself, "That can't be." Alara's patience snapped like a thread stretched too thin. "Tell me." Lysera's gaze lifted to Ilara's face. The healer's expression shifted serious, now weighted. "You're pregnant." Alara shut her eyes for 1 second. She didn't collapse. She didn't gasp. The news landed like a stone settling into the bottom of a lake, heavy, inevitable. When she opened her eyes again, the question came immediately. "Is there something wrong?" Lysera hesitated. Then carefully, the child's heartbeat isn't like any alpha or beta fetus I've ever examined. Alara felt her skin go cold. Lysera continued, voice low. "It responds to moonlight and to the pack's aura." Alara's hand moved to her abdomen again, protective now instinctive. The baby Darien's child inside her reacting to things it shouldn't. She wasn't sure what frightened her more, the pregnancy itself, or the implication that it mattered to more than just her and Darien. Lysera stepped closer and shut the door completely, as if sealing them away from the keep's listening walls. "You need to listen carefully," she said. Alara met her eyes. "I am listening. If the council finds out about this child," Lysera said, "they will not let you keep it." Alara's mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" Lysera didn't soften the truth. "They will take the child, raise it under their control, mold it into an heir they can direct." Alara stared. Her voice was thin as ice. And Lysera held her gaze for a long, grim moment. "You won't matter to them anymore." Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Alara let out a short, bitter laugh. "I never mattered to them." Lysera shook her head once slow. "Not like this. Now you're not just a Luna. You're the mother of something they don't understand." Alara's throat tightened. She remembered Magnus's voice cost, binding. She remembered Celine's smooth mockery behind Darien's door. She remembered Darien's silence. Everything aligned into a single brutal clarity. She was a tool. Her child would be the next tool. Lysera's voice dropped even lower, urgent. "If you intend to keep your baby with you, you need to decide before they do." Alara's hand rested firmly over her stomach, as if she could shield the child with her palm. Her voice came out calm to calm, the way wolves sounded right before they bit. "They won't touch my child." Lysera watched her carefully. "What are you going to do?" Alara didn't answer right away. She left the healer's chamber and walked the corridor as if sleepwalking. Cold stone, echoing steps, torches flickering. Darien's words repeated in her head. "She's a treaty, nothing more, a treaty bride, a solution, a thing with no value." Alara stopped in the middle of the corridor and pressed her hand to her abdomen again. This time the sensation was clearer. Not a movement, not yet, but a subtle awareness, as if her body was already building a home inside her. She leaned her forehead against the cold wall and whispered, "I won't let them take you." There was no room left for hope, no room for romance. This was survival now. Alara didn't look for Darien. She didn't ask for an audience. She didn't go to the council chamber and demand answers. If she confronted them, they would see emotion, and emotion in Nightfall was blood in the water. She returned to her room, closed the door, and leaned her back against it. It might look like her breaking point, rejected by her own mate and suddenly carrying a child no one wants her to keep. Most would fall apart, but for her, this becomes the power that could change everything. Stay with me to see what she does next, and don't forget to subscribe before we step into the most intense part of the story. For one heartbeat, she let herself feel it, the sharp ache of what she had wanted, the warmth of Darien's hand on her cheek, the way his voice had sounded when he said, "Stay." Then she inhaled and cut that ache away. Enough, she told herself. She moved quickly, not frantic, not messy. She didn't pack dresses. She didn't reach for anything that belonged to the Luna role. She chose what a survivor chose, a dark traveling cloak, sturdy boots, a small bag, dried provisions from her own stores, coins she had quietly saved because some part of her had always known that depending on Nightfall's mercy was dangerous. She opened the jewelry box and looked at the Luna necklace. It was heavy silver polished to reflect moonlight, a symbol, a collar disguised as honor. Alara stared at it for a long time. Then she lifted it from the velvet and set it on the table beside the bed. "I don't need this to know who I am," she murmured. From a drawer hidden beneath folded cloth, she retrieved something else, a simple pendant carved from pale moonstone, shaped like a small wolf. Her mother had pressed it into her palm before the wedding, eyes wet but voice steady. "Never let them define you." Alara closed her fist around it now, feeling the edges bite into her skin. She looped it over her head and let it settle against her chest. Her breath slowed. Her hand found her stomach again. This time her voice was steady. "You won't grow up where your mother is called nothing." Outside her chamber, the keep slept. Guards patrolled, but their steps were distant. The hour before dawn was always quiet wolves lulled by routine, by certainty, by the belief that their Luna belonged inside these walls. Alara moved through the corridors like a shadow. She didn't look back. She reached the main gate just as the sky began to fade from black to deep gray. Rowan Kale stood watch. He saw her immediately. His expression changed, not surprise exactly, but recognition sharpened by something like dread. "Luna," he said softly, "where are you going at this hour?" Alara didn't stop walking. She didn't raise her voice. "I'm going somewhere I don't have to explain my existence." Rowan's jaw tightened. He looked at her bag. He looked at her boots. He looked at the way her shoulders were set, pain held inside discipline. A younger guard beside him shifted uneasily. "Should we—" Rowan lifted a hand, stopping him. Rowan's gaze returned to Alara's face. There was understanding there, quiet and grim. He stepped aside. "Travel safely," he said. Alara paused for half a heartbeat, not to thank him, not to ask permission, but to let the moment imprint itself. A small mercy in a place built on obedience. She nodded once, then she passed through the gate. Nightfall. Keep rose behind her like a dark monument. The stone towers were still silhouetted against storm clouds lingering from the night before. She could almost feel eyes on her back, council eyes, alpha eyes, pack eyes, but she kept walking. The forest swallowed her quickly. Cold air bit at her cheeks. The ground was damp. Trees stood dense and closed their branches, knitting together overhead like ribs. Alara moved fast, but she did not shift. Shifting drained energy and put strain on the body. She couldn't risk it. Not now, not with a new life growing inside her. "Don't be reckless," she told herself. Not once. She followed no road. Roads belong to patrols. She crossed a stream and walked through the water for several yards, letting the current pull her scent away. She climbed over rocks, stepped carefully around patches of mud that would hold footprints. She moved against the wind when she could, forcing her scent backward. Each choice was a thread severed from the life she had left behind. Hours blurred, the sky lightened, the forest changed as she moved deeper into neutral territory. Fewer boundary markers, fewer signs of pack control. Still, she couldn't relax. At midday, she heard a sound behind her, soft, deliberate, too controlled to be wildlife. She spun, heart snapping into speed. A rogue stepped from behind a tree. He was in human form, but his eyes were too bright, too hungry. His smile showed too many teeth. Well, he drawled, "Look what wandered into my woods." Alara took a step back, hand moving toward the small knife she carried. The rogue laughed. A Luna all alone. He inhaled and his expression shifted. Interest sharpened. "Nightfall scent," he said, and something else. Alara's wolf pressed against her skin, ready to fight even if her body screamed no. The rogue moved closer. "You lost, sweetheart." Alara didn't answer. He reached out. The moment his fingers brushed her sleeve, something inside Alara detonated. A force surged through her veins, not heat, not pain, but pressure, like moonlight turning into weight. Silver light flared under her skin, racing from her wrist up her arm. The rogue jerked back so fast he stumbled, eyes wide. "What the—" Alara stared at her own hands, shocked. The silver glow wasn't bright like fire. It was cold and clean and heavy, like the moon itself had leaned closer to her. Her heartbeat and the rhythm inside her belly seemed to align in the same instant, two pulses striking the same drum. The rogue took another step back, fear overtaking hunger. "No," he muttered. "No, I'm not messing with that." He turned and vanished into the trees, retreating like prey. Alara stood trembling breath, ragged not from exertion, but from realization. That was not normal. That was not simply a Luna's presence. Her hand moved to her stomach again. The child inside her had responded. For the first time since leaving Nightfall, Alara felt something beyond pain. Power. It wasn't the kind council held on a dais. It wasn't the kind Darien carried in his voice. It was the kind that lived in blood and instinct and choice. By evening, exhaustion forced Alara to stop. She found a small overhang of rock, enough to shield her from wind, not enough to be a trap. She gathered dry branches and made a small fire. The warmth felt thin, but it was something. She sat with her back against stone and stared into the flames. Her body shook from delayed fear. Her muscles ached. Her throat burned from holding back the urge to cry. She laid her palm over her stomach. "We'll be okay," she whispered. She wasn't sure it was true, but she said it anyway, because if she didn't, the night would swallow her whole. Far behind her in the stone heart of Nightfall, Darien Thorne walked into the great hall and found Alara absent. Abeda approached careful and tense. "Luna isn't present," he said. Darien's brow tightened. It should not have mattered. He had trained himself for months to keep everything inside him under control, and yet something in his chest sharpened. He went to her chamber without waiting for explanation. The door was open. The room was neat. Too neat. Not the messy absence of someone who wandered for air. This was the precise emptiness of someone who had decided. Darien's gaze caught the Luna necklace on the table. His fingers closed around it, and the cold metal bit into his palm. A strange hollow opened in his chest, an emptiness he couldn't name. Footsteps behind him. Lysara Moonfall entered, face unreadable. "Alpha," she said slowly, "there is something you need to know." Darien turned. Lysara met his eyes and didn't look away. "She's pregnant." For a moment, the world tilted. Darien's mind tried to reject the word. Pregnant meant permanence. Pregnant meant consequences. Pregnant meant the storm night had not been a mistake that could be erased with silence. His voice came out rough. No. Lysara's expression didn't change, and she didn't leave alone. The second sentence hit harder than the first. Darien stared at the necklace in his hand as if it were evidence in a crime he hadn't known he committed. Council gathered quickly, summoned by urgency rather than tradition. Magnus Crow sat at the head of the table, eyes hard. "We must locate the child," Magnus said. "Not Alara, not the Luna, the child." Darien looked at them, truly looked for the first time, and something shifted. He saw the hunger beneath their concern, the cold calculation, the way they spoke about bloodline-like ownership. And he realized with a slow surge of disgust that something in this pack was rotten at the center. He left the council chamber without giving them an answer, his jaw locked so tight it hurt. Outside, dawn light hit the courtyard stones. Somewhere beyond those gates, Alara was alone, carrying his heir, and the council's first words had been not her name, but what she carried. For the first time in months, Darien felt the weight of his own choices like a wound. And somewhere in the deep forest, Alara lay beneath an overhang of rock fire, dying to embers hand over her stomach as if she could shield a future from the world. In the silence between her breaths, she understood something she hadn't fully understood when she first walked into Nightfall Keep. There were wolves who broke when they were called nothing, and there were wolves who learned in the moment of being dismissed that they had been handing their value to others all along. Alara didn't leave because she was weak. She left because she finally understood the difference between belonging and being kept. And once a wolf understands that no amount of power, no alpha command, no council decree, no stone walls can make her go back to living in a cage. Moonlight did not feel gentle in the neutral forest. Out here, it cut through the trees like a blade, silvering wet bark and stone and turning every shadow into something that could move. Alara Vane had barely slept beneath the rock overhang she'd chosen the night before. Even with a small fire, the cold seeped into her bones. Even with exhaustion pulling at her eyelids, her wolf refused to fully settle. Because running had changed her. Because being called nothing had done something to her instincts that Nightfall Keep never could. Before the sky turned fully pale, Alara rose. She kicked dirt over the embers, tucked her cloak tighter around her shoulders, and stood still for a moment, with her hand resting against her abdomen. She wasn't far enough. She knew it the way wolves knew when weather was about to shift, an invisible pressure in the air, a warning in the marrow. The scent of her still lingered in the area. Rain and streams could scatter it, but not erase it completely. Darien Thorne could track her with more than scent. If he chose to, he could follow the faint pull of the bond they both pretended didn't exist. And the council elder Magnus and his kind would not simply accept the disappearance of a pregnant Luna, not if the baby carried the future of Nightfall, not if the baby was more than that. Alara swallowed and whispered toward the life inside her, the words barely louder than the leaves shifting overhead. "I don't know where we're going, but I know we can't go back." She started walking again before fear could turn into hesitation. The forest deepened as she moved. The paths that belonged to Nightfall marked stones, carved symbols, patrol routes fell away behind her. Here there were no boundaries, no warnings etched in rock to tell you whose law you were under. Only the neutral lands, only the places where rogues lived, and the exiled survived. The places council members spoke about with disgust as if wolves outside the pack were less than wolves at all. Alara forced herself to keep a steady pace. Not too fast, her body needed strength for the days ahead, for the child growing inside her. Not too slow stopping made her an easy target. Her wolf stayed awake beneath her skin senses sharp. She listened for the crack of branches that meant someone was tracking, for the distant song of wolves that meant pack territory was closer than she wanted. And then she smelled smoke. Not the sharp scent of lightning-burned trees, not the damp sweetness of rotting leaves. This was cooking fire, heated broth, human form camp. Someone had been here recently. Alara stopped behind a wide pine trunk, breath held. The wind shifted, carrying the smoke to her, again stronger now. She listened. Footsteps. Deliberate. Not wildlife. More than one set. At least 4. Alara's fingers slid toward the small knife hidden beneath her cloak. Her heart pounded once hard as she reminded herself, don't shift, don't waste energy, don't panic. A voice spoke behind her, male, calm, almost amused. If you're trying to disappear, he said you should choose a direction that isn't downwind. Alara turned fast, blade half drawn. A man stood a few paces away in human form. He was tall, built like someone who survived on hard choices, dark hair, sharp eyes, and a posture that said he was ready for violence, but not eager for it. Behind him, 3 more rogues emerged between the trees like ghosts. The man lifted his hands slightly, a gesture that meant, I'm not attacking, but it did not make him harmless. Alara's wolf rose. The man watched her grip tighten on her knife and spoke again, voice level. Easy. If I meant to hurt you, you wouldn't have gotten far enough to touch that blade. Alara didn't lower it. What do you want? His gaze dropped not to her face, but to her wrist, where moonlight sometimes made the faint silver beneath her skin shimmer. Something flickered in his expression, like recognition colliding with disbelief. Then he looked back at her. That's what I should be asking you, he said. A Luna carrying the scent of Alpha Nightfall wandering alone in rogue land. That's not normal. Alara's jaw tightened. I'm not anyone's Luna. A rogue behind him scoffed, lips curling. No one leaves an Alpha that easily. The tall man, Kieran Drax Alara, realized from the way the others watched him, raised one hand, sharply silencing the comment. His eyes stayed on Alara. He inhaled once slowly, and his gaze sharpened. You're pregnant. Alara went rigid. Kieran didn't move closer. He didn't smile. He didn't press. I'm not saying it to threaten you, he added as if he could read the panic flashing through her body. I'm saying it because a pregnant she-wolf walking alone out here won't last long. Not against winter, not against hunters, not against the kind of wolves who see weakness as a meal. Alara forced her voice to stay steady. I'll survive. Kieran studied her, and something in his eyes softened by a fraction. Maybe. But your child needs more than cold ground and a dying fire. Alara didn't answer. She couldn't afford to trust him, and she couldn't afford to refuse without thinking. Kieran waited patient in a way that didn't belong to most rogues. Finally, he said, come with us. One night. That's it. If you want to leave at dawn, we won't stop you. Alara's wolf bristled at the idea of being led anywhere, yet her body, tired, hungry, already strained, recognized the truth. One night of warmth could be the difference between a healthy pregnancy and disaster. Still, Alara kept the knife in her hand as she nodded once. One night, she said, and if you try to trap me, Kieran's mouth twitched slightly. You won't be trapped, he said. Not here. He turned and the rogues moved with him, not surrounding Alara, but walking in a loose formation that gave her space. A subtle sign, a deliberate one. As they traveled, Alara watched everything. How they avoided open paths, how their heads turned at every sound, how they moved like wolves, even in human form, quiet, alert, practical. She understood something then. These were not the kinds of rogues Nightfall told stories about. These were survivors. When they reached the shelter, Alara felt her breath catch. It wasn't a den of thieves. It wasn't a dark cave filled with stolen goods and blood-soaked trophies. It was a hidden community tucked between rocky cliffs and tangled trees, protected by geography and careful secrecy. Small structures made of wood and stone, smoke curling from chimneys, a central fire where people gathered. Children, actual children, moving between adults with wary curiosity. Alara stepped into the clearing and felt dozens of eyes swing toward her. But unlike Nightfall's hall, the stares here weren't contemptuous. They were cautious, defensive, curious. No one looked at her like a trophy or a tool. An older woman approached holding a bowl of steaming soup. Alara hesitated. Hunger clawed at her, but instinct warned against accepting anything too quickly. The woman thrust the bowl forward anyway, chin lifted. "Eat," she said. "Here. If you're hungry, you eat first and ask questions after." Alara took it, hands trembling slightly from exhaustion more than fear. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman snorted softly, not unkindly. "Save thanks for people who deserve it." Alara sat near the central fire soup, warming her fingers. The heat seeped into her palm, into her wrists, into her chest. She hadn't realized how cold she'd been until warmth found her again. Moonlight slipped between the cliffs and touched her skin at the same time the firelight did. The silver beneath her wrist flared brighter just for a moment. Several rogues around the fire stiffened. One leaned back instinctively as if feeling pressure in the air. Kieran's gaze snapped to her wrist. He didn't speak, but his expression changed. Less guarded, now more unsettled. A small boy edged closer to his mother and whispered, wide-eyed, "Mama." "She's making the moon move." Alara quickly tugged her sleeve down, hiding the shimmer. Kieran stepped closer, voice low so only she could hear. "Do you know what you are?" Alara's throat tightened. "I know I don't have anywhere to go back to." Kieran studied her for a few seconds, then looked toward the far edge of the camp. "Then you should talk to Valus," he said. "If anyone can explain what you're carrying, what you are, it's him." "Who is Valus?" Alara asked. Kieran's mouth tightened. "An old wolf," he said. "The kind council hates because he remembers too much." Kieran led her to a small stone hut at the edge of the community. A thin line of smoke escaped through a crack in the roof. The air smelled like dried herbs and old wood. Inside, the light was dim. An elderly man sat near a low fire, hands held out toward the warmth. His hair was long and silver-white skin weathered like bark. His eyes looked clouded with age, yet when Alara stepped in, the old man didn't look at her face, he looked at her wrist. He stood slowly as if the act cost him something, and whispered with a voice like rough stone. "It can't be." Kieran frowned. Valus Alara's patience snapped, exhaustion sharpening it. "Everyone keeps saying that," she said. "I don't need fear. I need answers." Valus took a step closer, but stopped at a respectful distance. "Show me," he said softly. "Show me the mark." Alara hesitated. Trust was expensive. Kieran leaned in and murmured, "He won't hurt you." Alara lifted her sleeve. Moonlight seeped through the crack in the stone roof, landing on her wrist. The silver beneath her skin brightened the pattern clearer now, like a hidden rune waking under light. Valus inhaled slowly. "Ancient lunar bloodline," he breathed. Alara frowned. What bloodline? Valus's voice deepened, weighted with history. "A bloodline that existed before councils wrote law into stone," he said. "Before alphas were allowed to treat lunas like decorative chains. before mate bonds became political tools. Alara stood very still. Valis continued, eyes fixed on the silver glow. Your blood does not bow to alpha instinct, he said. It balances it. Kieran's face shifted. Shock, curiosity, something like awe. Alara's lips parted. My mother told me, never let them know what runs in my blood. Valis nodded slowly. She saved you, he said, because if Nightfall Council knew, they would never have let you walk free inside their walls. The words sank into Alara like ice. Valis motioned for Alara to sit. She did, though her muscles stayed tense, ready to spring if needed. He spoke carefully, as if explaining a truth that could break the wrong person. Ancient lunar bloodline is not simply rare, Valis said. It is old power, moonbound instinct, the kind that doesn't need titles to exist. Alara listened, heart pounding. Those with your bloodline, Valis continued, can calm alpha rage, resist alpha command, sense imbalance in a pack, make other wolves' instincts react, not from dominance, but from recognition. Alara's mind flashed to the storm night, Darien's eyes raw and uncontrolled, his breath catching when he inhaled her scent, the way his touch had steadied him. Alara swallowed. So, that night wasn't only mate bond. Valis met her gaze, expression gentle in a way the council would never permit. There is bond, he said, yes, but there is more. Your alpha came to you because the wolf inside him knew you could keep him from falling into darkness. Alara flinched at the phrase. Your alpha. He isn't mine, she said sharply. Valis didn't argue. Maybe not, he conceded, but the child you carry, the council will fear it more than they fear you. Kieran leaned forward. Why Valis's eyes dropped briefly respectfully to Alara's abdomen. Nightfall's alpha blood mixed with ancient lunar bloodline, he said. That child could become an heir who rules not only with dominance, but with balance. An alpha the council cannot control. Alara felt her skin prickle. Lysara's warning echoed in her head. They will take the child. They will control it. They will not let you keep it. Alara's hand tightened over her stomach. They won't find us, she said, voice low but steady. Valis watched her for a long moment, then spoke with quiet certainty. You can't run forever. Alara lifted her chin. Then I'll learn how to stop running. The statement surprised even her, but when it left her mouth, it felt like truth. Days passed. Alara stayed with Kieran's community longer than one night. She told herself it was temporary, that she was regaining strength before continuing on. But the truth was more complicated. Here she wasn't watched like a prisoner. She wasn't forced to stand in ceremonial silence. She was offered food without being asked what she owed. She was treated as someone who existed, someone who mattered, even before her bloodline became known. Valis taught her to listen to the moon instinct inside her rather than fear it. He explained that power was dangerous only when it was denied, suppressed, or forced to erupt under pressure. Kieran taught her practical survival, how to mask scent without exhausting herself, how to read hunter tracks, how to identify traps set for wolves rather than animals. One evening, a young rogue in their camp lost control. It happened fast one moment. He was arguing with another man near the fire. The next, his eyes were bright gold, his breath ragged, his wolf close to the surface. Alpha rage without the discipline that packs taught. The others moved in instinctively, ready to restrain him. Kieran cursed under his breath. He's losing his wolf. Two men approached with rope and a silver clasp meant to shock the body back into control. Alara stepped forward. Kieran grabbed her arm. Don't, he'll hurt you. Alara looked at the young rogue, wild-eyed, trembling with violent instinct, and something inside her settled into stillness. Not fear, not recklessness. recognition. She moved closer anyway, her hand lifted and pressed against the young man's chest, right over his pounding heart. Her voice was calm, low, unwavering. "Listen to me," she said. "Come back." Silver light seeped gently from her palm, soft, controlled, nothing like the explosive flare that had driven the forest rogue away. The young man shuddered. His breath caught. His eyes flickered. Then slowly the gold faded. His shoulders sagged. His hands unclenched. He blinked as if waking from a nightmare. The camp was silent. Kieran stared at Alara like he'd finally understood something he'd been circling. "You're not just carrying power," he said. Alara pulled her hand back, gaze steady. "I'm learning not to be afraid of it." From that moment, the way people looked at her changed. It wasn't pity, it wasn't suspicion, it was respect. Alara wasn't a Luna who had been discarded. She became something else, someone who could calm wolves the world had thrown away. Far away in Nightfall Keep, Darien Thorne did not sleep. Council reports piled on his desk border stability pack, morale, trade routes, enforcement plans. Every word felt meaningless. Every sentence read like an excuse to keep the world intact, while the most important thing in his life had slipped through his fingers. He stood in Alara's chamber, staring at the Luna necklace she had left behind. He touched it again. Cold, empty. Cade Riven entered quietly, cautious as always around Darien's moods. "Alpha Cade said the council wants to know if you will continue the search under official order." Darien didn't look up. "No." Cade froze. No, Darien's eyes lifted. The wolf in them was visible, bright beneath restraint. "I'll find her myself." Cade's voice lowered, using the bond. A pause. Darien's throat tightened. "If she still allows the bond to reach me," he admitted. Cade's honesty came like a blade. "Alpha, you made her believe she had no value." The words should have provoked rage. Instead, they landed with dull accuracy. Darien exhaled, barely audible. "I know." He left Nightfall before dawn with only Cade and a few loyal wolves. Not a grand patrol, not a council-sanctioned hunt. A man searching for the woman he'd wronged. The trail was hard. Alara was smart. She moved against wind, crossed streams, avoided deep footprints, erased evidence the way someone erased hope, carefully, completely. More than once, Darien reached a place where she had been only hours earlier. A small cave still warm with human breath, a snapped branch fresh enough to still smell green. A faint silver mark on stone where moonlight had kissed something unnatural. Cade studied one of those marks and murmured, "She's learning fast." Darien's jaw clenched. No, she was always strong. We just refused to see it. At a riverbank where the current swallowed Alara's scent, Darien stood still and let the cold water spray touch his face. Mate bond ached in his chest. Not the sweet pull of connection, but the pain of distance forced by mistakes. In the wind, he heard her voice as if the forest itself remembered it. "You won't grow up where your mother is called nothing." Darien's fists tightened, not in anger, in shame. Each time he arrived too late, he understood more clearly Alara was no longer waiting to be rescued. She was saving herself. The twist revealed itself through a small detail. When Darien returned briefly to Nightfall to check council reports and supply lines, Cade brought him something strange testimony from Rowan Cale, the guard at the gate. Rowan had admitted Alara left with no panic, no frantic rush. Pain in her eyes, yes, but clear intention in her steps. She wasn't wandering, Rowan had said. She was leaving. Cade met Darien's eyes. "I think she heard something, Alpha." Darien's stomach turned. He remembered Selene's voice in his study, Selene mentioning Alara shaping the conversation. Selene saying the exact words that demanded a cold response from an alpha who had been trained to view emotion as weakness. Darien found Celine in the records room surrounded by maps of neutral territory. He didn't waste time. That night, he said, voice low, "Did you know Alara was outside my door?" Selene didn't look up. "What night?" Darien stepped closer. "Don't." Selene closed the map, slowly, expression smooth. If she heard the truth, Selene said, "That isn't my fault." Darien's voice sharpened. "Truth." Celine finally looked up, eyes gleaming. She was a treaty bride, she said. "The council knows, the pack knows, you know." Darien's teeth clenched. "You wanted me to say it out loud." Celine's mouth curved. "I wanted you to remember who you are, and who are you?" Darien asked, wolf rising. Celine's gaze didn't flinch. "The one who belongs beside you," she said. "The place that should have been mine from the start." In that moment, everything fit. Not just jealousy, ambition. She had wanted Alara gone before Alara could become anything but a symbol, before the bond could form, before Alara's bloodline, if Selene suspected it could shift power in Nightfall. Darien's voice dropped until it chilled the room. "You pushed my mate away." Celine's smile was thin. "I saved you from a mistake." Darien took one step closer. "No," he said. "You made me become the mistake." The confrontation did not end quietly. Darien summoned the council and the pack to the great hall beneath moonlight, the same hall where Alara had stood in silver and been met with silence. Selene stood in the center now, chin high, refusing to show fear. Magnus frowned. "Alpha, this does not need to be public." Darien's voice cut through him. "What happens in darkness ends under moonlight." Celine's eyes flashed. "You'll regret this. Without me, the council won't stand with you." Darien stared straight at her. "If the council only stands with me when I abandon my mate," he said, "then I don't need that council." A hush swept the hall. Betas shifted. Wolves watched. Darien's next words were clear and final. "Selene Virex, for manipulating your alpha, endangering the Luna and the unborn heir, you are exiled from Nightfall. You leave our borders before the moon reaches its peak." Celine's composure cracked. Her face whitened, then hardened into hatred. "She'll never come back to you." Darien didn't flinch. "That will be her choice," he said, voice steady. "Not yours, not the council's, and not mine." For the first time, the pack heard their alpha admit something they had never heard before, that the Luna had the right to choose. After Celine's exile, the council stopped pretending. Magnus gathered the remaining elders privately. Their words, later whispered by those who overheard, were cold. "The alpha is losing control because of mate bond," one elder said. Magnus responded, "No, the alpha is irrelevant. The child is the problem." Rumors had already started about a silver mark about moonlight responding to Alara's presence. Even elders who pretended not to believe in old legends had heard the stories. Magnus spoke the truth they all feared. "If that child is born outside Nightfall's control," he said, "the structure we built collapses." And Alara, another elder, asked. Magnus's answer was a sentence that could have shattered any remaining illusion of humanity in the council. "The mother matters less than blood." Hunters were hired wolves trained to capture rogues and runaways. The order was not written. No seal, no signature. Only spoken law passed mouth to ear. Bring the pregnant woman back. If you cannot bring both, ensure the child does not fall into rogue hands. When asked about Alara's status as Luna, Magnus's voice had been flat. She abandoned that title out in the neutral lands. Alara woke before the camp stirred on the 6th night. Her wolf instincts screamed danger, not rogue scent. Not animals, hunters. Alara stepped out of the shelter and saw Kieran, already awake, blade in hand, eyes scanning the tree line. "They're surrounding us," he muttered. Alara's palm went to her stomach. "They found me." Kieran's jaw tightened. Then they step over us first. Alara shook her head. No, I won't let this place burn because I came here. A voice emerged from the darkness behind them, Valus wrapped in a cloak like a piece of the night itself. You still think you're a burden, he said quietly. Alara didn't answer. A silver-tipped arrow slammed into a tree near the fire, embedding with a sharp crack. A hunter's voice echoed from beyond the trees. Alara Vane, come out. We have an order to bring you back. Alara took one step forward. Kieran grabbed her wrist. Don't. Alara looked at him. If I keep running, they'll hunt everyone who helps me. Valus's voice came like a stone dropped into water. Then don't run like prey. Alara turned toward the darkness. For the first time, she didn't retreat. Hunters surged in. They moved in formation, trained, coordinated carrying tools designed specifically for wolves. Silver nets, chains etched with council marks, arrows dipped in suppressants that numbed wolf instinct and made shifting feel like tearing skin. Rogues fought back, but hunters fought with the cold focus of men who believed they were right. A hunter lunged toward Alara with a net. Don't resist, he snapped. The child must be protected from you. Alara froze. The words were wrong in a way that made something inside her go eerily still. From me, she repeated softly. The hunter's eyes were hard. A runaway mother doesn't get to decide the future of an alpha heir. Alara stepped forward. Silver light began to creep up her wrist, spreading like moonlight turned alive. It climbed her forearm, flickered along her collarbone beneath her cloak. The air shifted. Wind changed direction as if obeying her breathing. Every wolf in the camp felt it, an unfamiliar pressure. Not alpha dominance, not the command that forced knees to bend. Something else. A quiet force that made instincts hush. A hunter raised a silver blade. Alara raised her hand. The silver light burst outward in a perfect ring, cold, clean, controlled. The net dropped to the ground as if suddenly too heavy to hold. The blade in the hunter's grip fractured a crack, racing through metal like ice splitting under pressure. Wolves mid-fight faltered not from pain but from sudden calm. Rage drained out of them like water leaving a broken cup. Kieran stared breath-catching. Alara stood beneath Moonlight voice, not loud but carrying. No one touches my child. The lead hunter snarled, fighting the pressure. You have no right? Alara turned her head toward him. The silver mark on her skin flared bright. I have the right to be a mother. The pressure intensified. The hunters stumbled back, unable to push forward. No one died, but no one could impose their will on her anymore. Valus sank to one knee, not forced, reverent. Around him, several rogues bowed their heads instinctively. Even Kieran lowered his gaze slightly, as though the world had shifted and he was acknowledging the shift. Valus's voice was soft, but it echoed. Not a discarded Luna, he said. The lunar bloodline has returned. Miles away in the forest, Darien Thorne stopped mid-stride. The bond in his chest ignited. Not with pain, with light and internal flare so vivid it felt like moonlight, striking directly through his ribs. Cade caught up behind him, breath hard. Alpha Darien stared into the trees as if he could see through miles of shadow. She doesn't need to be found anymore, he said, voice rough. Cade frowned. What do you mean? Darien swallowed. His eyes flashed wolf gold. She's awakened. In that moment, Darien understood the most terrifying truth of all. He had not only lost a wife, he had lost the only being who could stand equal to his wolf without fear. Back at the rogue shelter, the hunters retreated, disarmed and shaken. Alara let them go, but not without a message. She stood at the edge of the clearing, moonlight on her face, and said to the trembling lead hunter, "Go back and tell the council I don't belong to them." The hunter's voice shook. "They won't stop." Alara's expression didn't change. "Then they'll learn to fear what they dismissed." When the hunters disappeared into the trees, Kieran approached quietly. "What now?" he asked. Alara looked down at her abdomen, then at the camp around her, the rogues, the exiles, the children who had been born under no banner but survival. She spoke slowly. "I'm done running." Vela stepped behind her, voice sure. "Then they won't be hunting a lost Luna anymore," he said. "They'll be facing something they can't control." Alara lifted her face towards the moon. For the first time in days, she didn't feel cold. She felt anchored. She belonged to herself. Darien arrived when the sky had begun to fade toward gray, following the pull of the bond to the same clearing where Hunter's footprints still scarred the ground. Cade walked behind him, staring at the broken silver net, the fractured blades, the strange scorch marks that looked like moonlight had burned the earth. "Alpha," Cade murmured. "This doesn't look like a normal rogue camp." Darien's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "No," he said. "This is where she stopped running." Rogues turned toward him instantly, tense-ready. Kieran stepped forward, blocking the path with the posture of a man who would die before letting a threat pass. "If you're here to drag her back with an alpha order," Kieran said, "you came to the wrong place." Darien didn't answer immediately because behind Kieran, Alara stood under the last thin beam of moonlight. She wore a dark cloak, now hair loosely tied back her wrists, still faintly luminous. One hand rested over her stomach. She was not the woman who had stood in Nightfall's hall waiting for acknowledgement. She looked at Darien like she was looking at a past she had already survived. Darien's voice softened. "Alara." Her reply was calm and sharp. "Alpha Thorn." The title in her mouth was colder than accusation. Darien took one step forward. Kieran's hand went to his weapon. Alara lifted her hand slightly. "It's fine," she said to Kieran. "He can't touch me unless I allow it." The words struck Darien like a physical blow. He stopped. Alara's eyes held his. "Did you come to reclaim Nightfall's heir?" she asked. Darien shook his head once. "I came to find you." Alara let out a humorless breath, almost a laugh. "Me," she said. "That's interesting. When I stood beside you in the Great Hall, you called me a treaty. When I ate alone, you called it necessary distance. When I stood outside your study and heard you speak, you called me nothing." Darien's fingers curled as if restraining the urge to reach for her anyway. "I was wrong," he said. Alara's gaze didn't soften. "Wrong isn't enough." The air between them tightened until it felt like it might snap. Darien did not release his alpha aura. He did not command. He did not try to force her eyes to meet his. He simply stood there and took the weight of her words. Alara's voice lowered. "You didn't lose me, Darien." He looked up. Her next sentence was precise, surgical. "You never had me." The bond in Darien's chest clenched painfully, but Alara didn't stop. A woman can't be lost if she was only ever placed somewhere like an object. Darien's voice came out rough. "Then let me start from nothing." Alara studied his face for a long moment. "Not with words," she said. Darien nodded once, with actions. He drew a breath, then spoke quietly for her alone. "I listened to the council instead of listening to my wolf. I let Celine steer me. I let you stand alone in a pack that should have been your home." Alara didn't blink. "I'm not here to tell you to forgive me," Darien continued. "I don't have the right." Even Kieran looked faintly surprised. "Alphas did not admit lack of right," Darien went on. "Nightfall isn't what it was when you left. Celine is gone. The council will not touch decisions about you or our child again." Alara's voice turned hard. The council didn't ask permission when they hired hunters. Darien's head snapped slightly. Hunter's Valus emerged from the shadows, leaning on his staff eyes, ancient. They came last night, he said. Silver nets. Orders with no signature. Cade's face tightened. Magnus. Darien's eyes darkened, wolf rising behind them. Alara saw it, and for the first time she didn't fear his power. She simply waited to see what he would do with it. Darien met her gaze. I'll handle them, he said. Alara's answer was immediate. No, she said. We'll see how you handle them. As if summoned by those words, a sharp hunting whistle cut through the trees from the north. Kieran swore, they're back. Valus's voice was grim. Not just back, he murmured. More. Hunters emerged from the tree line in a tight formation. This wasn't a scattered group of hired trackers. This was a force prepared to capture a bloodline. Chains with council marks. Arrows dipped in suppressants. Nets layered with charms designed to blur scent and confuse instinct. The hunter captain bowed very slightly toward Darien. Alpha Thorn, he said, respectful but firm. Step aside. We're executing council order. Darien stepped forward, placing himself between them and Alara without touching her. The council has no authority here, he said. The captain's gaze slid to Alara's abdomen. They have authority to protect Nightfall's heir from rogue influence. Alara's laugh was cold. You call kidnapping a mother protection. The captain's voice was flat. The child matters more than your feelings. Darien's growl was low and lethal. Not directed at Alara, not meant to dominate her, but aimed at the men daring to speak about his mate like property. Say that again, Darien warned, and I'll tear out your tongue. Bows rose, nets unfurled. The fight began. Rogues surged forward with knives and brute survival instinct. Cade led Darien's loyal wolves to flank the hunters from the east. Kieran fought like a man defending his own family. But Darien did not stay back in command like a distant ruler. He stayed in front of Alara. Every silver-tipped arrow aimed at her was knocked aside. Every net thrown her way met his blade first. A hunter shouted, "Take the mother. Don't harm the unborn." Alara's stomach clenched with horror. Darien heard it too. He moved so fast he was a shadow slamming into the hunter and throwing him off his feet. She's not a vessel, Darien snarled. She's not a container for the child. A hidden archer fired from the side, aimed not at Darien but at Alara. Darien pivoted, taking the shot into his shoulder. Pain flashed. Blood soaked the fabric. Alara's breath caught. Darien. He gritted his teeth, snapped the arrow shaft, and stepped back in front of her. Get behind me, he ordered instinctively. Alara's eyes flashed. I'm not behind anyone anymore. For a split second, Darien looked at her, really looked, and something in him shifted. He nodded once, accepting the boundary and the strength in it. Then stand beside me, he said. That sentence changed the shape of the fight. It wasn't a command to hide. It was acknowledgement. Alara stepped to his side. The silver in her wrist brightened. Darien's wolf, for the first time, lowered, not in submission, but in recognition of a different kind of authority. Their power touched, and instead of clashing, it balanced. The silver poison began to creep through Darien's shoulder. His aura spiked erratically. Nearby rogues flinched from it, instincts reacting to alpha dominance. Alara felt his pain like a knife in her own chest, not forced, not commanded, simply the bond calling her whether she wanted it or not. She placed her hand over his wound. Darien's voice was strained. Don't. The silver will hurt you. Alara stared at him, tears stinging her eyes. The first time you've told me to stay away, she whispered, because you were afraid I'd be hurt. Not because you were afraid I'd matter. Darien couldn't answer. Silver light flowed from Alara's palm, not healing entirely, but stopping the poison from spreading. Darien's breath hitched forehead leaning closer to hers. The bond between them surged. In one sharp, intimate instant, Alara felt everything he'd hidden, the panic. When he realized she'd left the sleepless nights, the raw regret, the love he'd buried under duty like a corpse. And Darien felt what she had endured. The empty chair at dinner, the cold corridors, the humiliation, the terror of having her child stolen. Alara pulled her hand back, eyes wet but voice steady. Now you know what it felt like. Darien's voice broke slightly. I won't forget. The hunter captain ordered a large net thrown over both Alara and Darien. Darien lunged to tear it apart, but Alara caught his wrist. No, she said. This time, let me. She stepped forward, one hand on her abdomen, one hand raised to the descending net. The silver light that flared was different from the first time she'd awakened. It wasn't explosive, it was controlled. The net stopped in midair, suspended as if held by moonlight itself. Alara's voice rang clear. I don't belong to the council, she said. My child doesn't either. The net shattered metal raining down in useless fragments. The hunters faltered. Kieran led the rogues in a hard counterattack. Cade disarmed the flank. Darien moved straight to the captain, grabbed his collar, eyes cold. Tell Magnus this, Darien said. If he hunts my mate and my child again, I won't just remove the council. I'll tear down every law that ever made him think he had the right. The captain nodded, trembling. Darien released him. He didn't kill him because Alara was watching, and because he wanted her to see he no longer let power make him blind. When the hunters retreated, the clearing smelled of smoke, cracked silver, and churned earth. Darien stood in front of the Alara, blood still soaking his shoulder face, pale with pain and adrenaline. Yet his gaze stayed fixed on her, not on the men running away. Then he lowered himself. Slowly, deliberately, he knelt on one knee in front of her. The rogue camp fell silent. Kieran's brows drew together. Valus said nothing, but his eyes gleamed as if he'd expected this moment for a long time. Alara stared stunned. What are you doing? She asked. Darien lifted his eyes to hers. What I should have done from the beginning, he said. Not forcing you into a title, not hiding behind Alpha Command, not asking you to come back because of the child. He drew a steady breath. I'm asking for a chance to be the man who deserves to stand beside you. Alara didn't speak. The silence stretched heavy with everything that had happened. Darien continued, voice stripped of authority, only truth left. If you don't return to Nightfall, I won't drag you back. If you want to raise our child here, I'll protect this place. If you never want to see me again, I'll still make sure the council can't touch you. Alara's throat tightened. She asked carefully, what do you want? Darien's answer was simple, and it hurt because of how much he meant it. I want you to have a choice, he said, even if your choice means I lose you forever. Alara looked down at her abdomen, then at the rogues who had protected her when she had nothing. She looked at Kieran and Valus and the children watching from behind shelters. Then she looked back at Darien. I won't go back because you took an arrow for me once, she said. Darien nodded. I understand. I need to see Nightfall change. Alara continued. Not promises, not one night of regret. I need to know that Pack will never treat my child like property again. Darien pushed himself up, wincing slightly from his wound. Then I'll change it, he said. Alara's eyes hardened. Don't do it to get me back. Darien met her gaze. I'll do it because it should have been done long before you ever had to run. That sentence, quiet, unselfish, made Alara go still. Not forgiving, not softening, but listening. Darien returned to Nightfall with Cade. Magnus Crow was waiting in the great hall as if he'd known Darien would come storming through the doors. Alpha Magnus said coldly, "You have dishonored your position for emotion." Darien walked past him as though he were nothing but a pillar. "No," Darien said. "You dishonored this pack when you sent hunters after a mother." Magnus's face tightened. "The child belongs to Nightfall." Darien turned sharply, and his alpha aura hit the room like a wave enough to make lesser wolves stiffen. "The child belongs to itself," Darien said, "and until it can choose, it belongs with the mother who protected it when you wanted to own it." The council protested. Voices rose, arguments about tradition and stability and law flooded the hall. Darien cut through it by laying evidence on the table. Orders passed through hunter hands, maps marked with routes, hidden transactions linked back to Magnus, a captured hunter's sworn statement. Cade placed each piece down with crisp finality. "All of it carries council marks," Cade said. Betas in the hall began to growl low. Pack members gathered at the edges, drawn by the tension. Darien's voice rose, not shouting, but carrying. "From this moment," he declared, "the old council is dissolved. Magnus Crow is stripped of elder authority and held for judgment under new law." Magnus's eyes blazed. "You break ancestral law." Darien's answer was calm. "No," he said. "I break the law you've been using to hide greed." Nightfall watched their alpha choose something no alpha was supposed to choose: justice over convenience, family over political structure, truth over control. Weeks passed. Alara remained in the rogue shelter. Darien did not send wolves to seize her. He did not demand she return. He did not summon her to prove loyalty. He sent practical things through Lysara Medicine's safe for pregnancy food supplies, blankets. He sent reports of changes, protections for mothers' laws, forbidding forced separation, a restructured council that included a healer and beta representation, even a seat for neutral living wolves who wanted protection without surrendering identity. And he sent letters, handwritten, no commands, no threats. In the first letter, Darien wrote, "I'm not asking you to trust me now. I'm only trying to give you one more reason each day to fear Nightfall less than you did yesterday." Alara read it in silence. She didn't reply, but she didn't burn it either. Kieran noticed the folded paper kept safely beneath Alara's bedding and asked bluntly, "You're softening?" Alara's answer was quiet, "I'm watching." Valus smiled faintly. "Sometimes watching is how the heart learns trust again," he said. Then one morning, Alara stood on a ridge and looked toward Nightfall's distant territory. Her abdomen had rounded noticeably. The baby moved more often, now stronger, as if it knew something even she didn't. Valus stood beside her staff, planted in earth. "The child's blood recognizes the place it can change," he murmured. Alara swallowed. "If I go back," she said, "does that make me weak?" Valus shook his head. "Weakness is returning because you're afraid to be alone," he said. "You're returning with conditions, with strength, with the knowledge that you can leave again if you must. That isn't weakness." That night, Darien came to the boundary of the rogue shelter, as he had done before, stopping at the edge, never entering unless invited. Alara stepped out to meet him. His eyes softened when he saw her. "You called me?" he asked quietly. Alara nodded. "I'll return to Nightfall," she said. Darien looked like he forgot how to breathe, but Alara continued immediately firm. "Not because you're alpha, not because the child is heir, not because of any treaty." Darien's voice was nearly a whisper. "Because you choose," Alara held his gaze. "Because I choose," she said. "And if Nightfall becomes a cage again, I'll choose to leave again." Darien nodded, voice steady with promise. I'll keep the door open, he said. I won't lock it. When Alara walked through the gates of nightfall, the second time the air felt different. She wasn't escorted like property. She wasn't placed like a symbol. She came with Kieran Valus and a few rogues behind her, not as a threat, but as witnesses that she wasn't alone and she wasn't powerless. Darien stood inside the gate. He didn't reach for her. He didn't touch her without permission. In front of the gathered pack, he lowered his head, an alpha bowing to his Luna, not from compulsion, but respect. Whispers rippled. Betas watched, stunned. Even older wolves looked unsettled because this wasn't tradition. It was change. Alara approached. This time she extended her hand first. Darien looked at it like it was something sacred he didn't deserve yet. When he finally took it, the mate bond between them pulsed warm, not painful, not forced. Lysara stood nearby and smiled gently. Welcome back, Luna. Alara turned toward the pack, her voice clear. I didn't return for pity, she said. I returned to build a pack where no mother has to run to protect her child. A growl of acknowledgement rose, one voice, then another, then several more. Not perfect, not unanimous, but real. That night, Alara and Darien stood beneath moonlight in the stone courtyard, where the Luna rite had once been performed without true acceptance. No council, no treaty, no audience, just them. Darien's voice was careful. May I touch you? Alara studied him, then nodded once. When his hand cupped her cheek, she didn't tremble with fear of being discarded. She spoke softly. The bond can't be used as a cage. Darien's thumb brushed her skin gentle. It won't be, he promised. The bond is where I learned to stand beside you. Alara placed her hand against his chest. Darien placed his hand over her abdomen. Silver light seeped faintly from Alara's mark, spreading into his palm like moonlight warming stone. Darien's wolf did not resist it. It lowered, not dominated, balanced. The mate bond, completed not in spectacle but in choice. Weeks later, under the first full moon of spring, Alara went into labor. Lysara prepared the birthing chamber with calm efficiency. The room was warm. The air smelled of herbs and clean water. Darien stayed at Alara's side through every contraction, his hand steady in hers. When pain crested high enough to steal Alara's breath, she gripped his fingers and hissed, half laughing through agony. If you tell me I'm breathing wrong. Darien's face was pale with fear, but his eyes were soft. I wouldn't dare, he whispered. Lysara let out a small, amused sound. Good, she said. An alpha who knows fear is a sign of a healthy family. Hours later, a baby's cry filled the room, strong, outraged, alive. The air shifted as if even the moon outside paused to listen. Lysara placed the newborn in Alara's arms. A healthy boy, she said. Darien stared at his son, something breaking open inside him. Dark hair like his, tiny hands clenched into fists. And when the baby's eyes opened briefly, a faint silver sheen flashed across the irises like moonlight on water. Alara breathed out a name like a prayer. Orin. Darien looked at her, voice raw. Orin Thorn. Alara's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. Orin Vane Thorn. Darien's eyes filled and he nodded. His mother's name belongs in his history, he said, where no one can erase it. Alara looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time, without hesitation, she leaned her forehead against his. Darien wrapped his arms around her, and their son, careful, reverent, as if holding them too tightly might wake him from a dream he didn't deserve. Nightfall did not collapse when Orin was born. It changed. Alara insisted on laws that protected mothers and children, laws written in stone so council could never claim ignorance again. No child could be separated from its mother for politics. No Luna could be barred from decisions involving family bond. Rogues seeking protection could be judged by actions rather than past labels. Kieran became a bridge between Nightfall and the neutral community. Valus became an advisor for history, reminding the new council what old laws had been before they were twisted. Lysera held veto power over any decision that endangered pregnant wolves or children, a safeguard built into the pack's new structure. Darien did not become weaker by sharing power. Nightfall became stronger because it no longer ruled by fear. One evening, months later, Orin slept in a cradle carved with moon symbols. Darien stood beside Alara in the dim nursery light and spoke quietly as if the words could still cut if said too loudly. "I called you nothing," he said. Ilara looked at their son, then at Darien. Her voice was steady. "I remember." Darien swallowed hard. "Do you forgive me?" Alara was silent for a moment. Then she answered with truth that didn't flatter him. "I chose to return," she said. "Forgiveness is something you earn every day by living like the man you're trying to become." Darien nodded slowly, eyes lowered. "Then I'll earn it every day," he said. Years passed. People stopped telling Alara's story as the tale of a Luna who ran away. They told it as the tale of a pack that learned too late the cost of calling a woman nothing. They told it as the tale of an alpha who thought power meant holding everything tightly, until he learned real strength was letting someone choose. They told it as the tale of a council that believed blood could be owned until a mother proved that bloodline was not a chain and motherhood was not weakness. Orin grew up not as a weapon shaped by elders, but as a child born from mistakes and courage and love rebuilt through action. Under moonlight, Alara stood beside Darien, not as a treaty's price, but as the reason peace finally meant something more than survival. And if anyone ever tried to call her nothing again, Nightfall itself would answer them, because the pack had learned the lesson the hard way: a person's value doesn't come from a title the powerful grant. It comes from the moment they refuse to be owned. Alara walked away when staying meant losing herself. Darien changed when love required more than regret, and together they proved that a bond, true bond, can't be forced by law or claimed by dominance. It can only be chosen. That was the message Nightfall carried forward under the moon. Not that power should be feared, but that it should be tempered by respect, especially for the ones who have the courage to leave and the courage to return only on their own terms. Thank you for staying with this story through the silence, the heartbreak, and the moment she chose to walk away and rewrite her fate. If her journey meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. A simple like or subscribe helps keep these stories alive and brings more of them your way. And if you're not ready to leave just yet, there are more powerful stories waiting for you right here.